Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this event exploring themes of Carol Sorhando's new block commission, The Golden Crown. Today, we welcome artists Carol Sorhaindo and Bella Milroy. I'm Ruth Dauber, and I'm the assistant curator here at Wising Arts Centre. Hi, Carol, and hi, Bella. How are you both today?
I'm great. I'm good. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks. Really nice to be here with you all.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you both. So before we get started, we should describe ourselves for access reasons. So I am a white cis woman in my early 30s, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. I have small silver earrings on, and I have wavy blonde hair. I'm sat in what we call the Zoom Lounge at Wising Arts Centre, and there's a white wall in the background. Carol, if you would like to go next, that would be great.
I am a Black African Caribbean woman, age 60. I'm wearing a turquoise top and matching earrings. I have black hair, which is tied back, and I am sitting in my lounge in Dominica and Caribbean, and behind me there's a picture of a painted fern, which I
Great. And Bella?
I'm a white woman in my early 30s. I've got pale skin with round cheeks. I've got kind of short, choppy brown hair and kind of dark rimmed glasses with over ear headphones on. I'm wearing like a blue striped linen shirt with there's like a sofa in the background with some cushions and some heat pads and some framed prints on the wall with a lamp. And also, you might see some sleepy small dogs in the background from time to time.
Nice. Cool. So, for those who are unfamiliar with what the new Block Commission is, this is a new set of commissioning from Wising Arts Centre, supported by the Art Fund Reimagine project. The new Block Commission moves away from indoor exhibition-based projects to a site-based approach that makes our work visible. Carol has produced the first in the series of works that will be installed on the front of Wising's building. The format of today's event is that both Carol and Bella have chosen some work to share with us. This will focus on Carol's new work, The Golden Crown, and both Carol and Bella's shared research interests, which range from growing projects, experiences of public and private spaces, and practices that are centered in process, fragmentation, collaboration, and care. We will then have some questions from myself and questions I have gathered from the team at Wising Arts Centre. Before we launch into presentations, I should introduce our wonderful speakers. We will first be hearing from Carol. Carol is a visual artist with an MA in creative practice and a diverse portfolio career. She draws inspiration from nature and landscapes with a particular interest in plants of economic health and ethnobotanical interest on the island of Dominica, where she currently lives. Her research extends to use of plants as pigments and fibre extraction for textile dyeing and creative applications. Having lived in both the UK and Dominica, Carol's own migration story, entangled transatlantic history, and impact on mental well-being are of key importance. Carol explores the interplay of dark and light, joy and pain, which are brought to light through botanical narratives which speak of migration, trauma, African and Indigenous knowledges, resistance, and healing. Carol also took part in a residency at Wising in 2022 as part of the World Reimagine project, which sought to reimagine our past, present, and the future we can create together. After the team were introduced to Carol and her wonderful practice, we have been lucky to work with her again on the new Block Commission. Next up, we'll be hearing from Bella Milroy. Bella is an artist and writer who lives in her hometown of Chesterfield, Derbyshire. She works responsibly through mediums of sculpture, drawing, photography, text, writing, gardening, and curating. She makes work about making work and being disabled, and not being able to make work and being disabled. This process-based practice is fundamental to her as a disabled artist. She is continually motivated by concepts of public and private spaces and where the sick and or disabled body exists within them, themes which emerge throughout much of her work. She is passionate about contributing to the cataloguing of disabled artists, as well as advocating for better, more accessible and enjoyable working experiences for disabled artists across the industry. Examples of this are found in many of her curatorial projects, such as Soft Sanctuary, Mob Shop, and Further Afield. She was artistic associate at the Level Centre, Derbyshire in 2021 to 2023. And Bella will also be joining us at Wising as part of our residency programme later in the year. So I'll leave you all now to hear from Carol.
So hi everybody. Thank you to Wising and thank you to Bella for agreeing to be in conversation. I'll be describing my work in the context of this commission for Wising, titled The Golden Crown. The first image you see is me with my eyes closed, which is very significant to the piece and to my practice. So our entrance to the past is through the act of remembering. My practice is a very reflective one. It involves looking at history, life in general, entanglement, emotions and trauma, joy and pain. So this piece, it also looks at things like the third eye, inner vision, and the importance of sleep to our health and in life in general. Sleep is something which I sometimes struggle with, or lack of, which affects your physical and mental well-being. So this image is me with my eyes closed, and I'm looking through a veined leaf. It's a black and white image, and I'm looking through the veins of a leaf, which gives a kind of fragmented view. This particular leaf was found on a nature hike I did to a place called Jacko Steps in Dominica. Jacko Steps was a route built by enslaved Africans, and the Maroons were enslaved Africans who escaped into the hills away from the cruel plantation system, and they lived in the hills of Dominica for 30 odd years before they were hunted down and captured and basically tortured and killed by the British colonial rule at the time. So that piece is the main inspiration for the commission. So very significant image. If we can go to the next slide. The next slide is looking at a mountain view in Dominica. Dominica is a very important part of my migratory journey. It's where I currently live. It's where my parents are from. And this is a very lush and verdant landscape. So the picture is showing a mountain peak with lots of clouds over it, lots of greenery. And the very nature of island Creole culture is a very entangled one. In Dominica, we have indigenous population who were there since before colonial times. They're very connected to the land. We were also captured by the French, Spanish, and British, and we have an African population who were also brought in during the slavery period. So for me, my daily interaction with the land is very important with my practice and my migration journey and moving back home to be more connected to the green. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is a picture of Wimpole Hall, which is a stately home in Cambridgeshire. Wimpole Hall it became very significant to me and to my research in last year, actually. I was commissioned by the World Reimagine Project to paint one of the globes which looked at different aspects of African history. And my globe was titled Economic Biosphere, and it was looking at plants of economic interest. So whilst I was, that led to me being at Wising on residency, and which is a place I really enjoyed being in. And it also led to research looking more closely at the connections I could find in Cambridge really to history, and my history in particular. So Wimpole Hall was very significant in colonialism and the slavery story. In 1729, the York Talbot opinion was, basically it was a law passed by Philip York, who was the first Earl of Hardwicke. And this law stated that any enslaved Africans who arrived in Britain, they could be recaptured and returned to the Caribbean plantations. So for me, Wimpole Hall became a very symbolic site. And Wimpole Hall also, I found out, grew pineapples, which was a very, again, if you can, this slide shows an image of a pineapple, which is the plant of key importance in this commission. Pineapples are really fascinating plants. They kind of touch on all the senses. They touch on the senses of touch, the senses of sight, smell, and taste. They're connected with exoticism, glass houses and greenhouses, British stately homes. And they also come from this part of the world. Pineapples were food and medicine to indigenous people, and they were actually seen as a welcome symbol. And during the colonial era, they became a symbol of status. They were even rented out, and they were really such an expensive item. So this is a plant that's forever imprinted on my mind. And this leads to the pineapple also, for me, it represents the pineal gland, because the pineal gland is a gland which is situated behind the brain, which is a light-sensitive gland which secretes hormones of melatonin and serotonin, which help to regulate sleep and wake cycles. The pineal gland is also connected to the third eye, this thing about inner vision, intuition. So the pineapple to me is very symbolic, because it also looks a little bit like the pine cone and was seen as a status symbol. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my practice and use of natural materials. So for me, this image represents entanglement. The image shows a mix. It's pineapple fibers, but they're all entangled. All the bits are entangled. It's part of my extraction process. And in it, you might see a mix of prickles, there's a mix of fibers, there's a mix of residual pulp. So if we go to the next slide, the next slide shows that it shows the prickles from the edge of the pineapple leaf. And to me, this is part of my extraction process. The prickles were also incorporated into the Wising Commission. And it also, the prickles for me represent that care and attention needs to be taken when extracting information or extracting fibers, because there's actually physical pain which comes from extracting fibers if your hands get caught on that, as to there is physical pain when extracting fibers of information from history. So if we go to the next image, this shows me extracting fibers from the pineapple leaf. And the next image shows the end result, which are very silken fibers. One of them, so there's two fibers there entangled. One of them is a natural form, natural color, and the other one is dyed with a natural pigment. If we go to the next image. Okay, so this image shows pineapple slices with pineapple seeds on the edges. My practice is a very reflective one. I try to go with the flow and go with the moment. And in discovering things about the plants, for me, this was a moment of revelation whilst actually doing my research for this commission, because pineapples are something I use every single day. And on this particular occasion, I was in a very reflective, mindful stage when preparing my fruit salad. And I saw all these little dots inside the pineapple. So this image represents pineapple seeds, which I've never actually seen before in that quantity. There were so many of them. And I've actually incorporated that into the piece of work as well. So if we go to the next image, another revelation of light. This was actually the parchment found on the outside of the pineapple leaf. And to me, it was such a beautiful image. So this image shows me holding a little bit of pineapple parchment, which is the outer coating of the pineapple leaf, and holding it up to the light was such a beautiful revelatory moment, and also something that could be used in a future piece of work. So next image. There are two dies which I use in this particular commission. So this picture shows on the left-hand side is a pressing of a natural plant that I grew. And this is a pressing of the annatto plant, which in Dominica we call ruku. And ruku was used by indigenous people. It grows here. It's from this part of the world. And on the other side, on the right-hand side, it shows a spiky ruku pod with me touching the dye, which is a red dye extracted from the ruku plant. Like Bella, I use pressed plants in my work as well. And so this shows the roots. It's a very young plant. It's a bit like the herbarium pages, so I like to create that as part of my process. The next image is another dye that I use in my work, which is logwood. Logwood, again, is very significant in trade and colonial expansion. It was used very much in the dye industry in Britain. So this image shows logwood chippings on the left-hand side, which is the inner core of the logwood tree, locally known as campeche, and it produces a purple dye, which is seen on the right-hand side of the image. And this was also used in the commission. So the next two final images actually talk about the actual commission. So this was the piece that was created. It was designed to go on a billboard and seen as one image. I wanted the image to have a kind of otherworldly quality. So this image shows the final commission, and it's a two-layered piece, a little bit like going back to the first image of me looking through the veined leaf. And so the background is a natural dyed background, using logwood and annatto dyes, with some drawing of a pineapple on the forehead and an image of a being. It was actually taken from a photograph of myself, but with closed eyes. And overlaid over that is a mesh that I created, like a leaf shape, using the extracted pineapple fibers. Across the middle is a kind of vein which goes through the middle, which is using pineapple prickles, pineapple fibers, and different colored dyes. This piece, so basically what happened was the site, there were some issues with the site, and we had to change the format. So if we go to the final image, this shows basically some changes in the format, which caused me quite a little bit of, it was quite an interesting process when I heard that the site was changed, and it was a choice of either separating the image or creating something new for this new site. It caused kind of a lot of deliberation on my part, which caused a lot of reflection about life, about change. And eventually I was very happy and excited, which shows that sometimes you have trials in life, but when you go with a bit more of an open, intuitive mind, things can open up. And I realized that this was actually more kind of fitting in a way, because a lot of my work is looking at fragmentation. I realized also that Wising will never see, or may never see, the piece of work that I produce here, with all the interaction with the wind and the light. When you see the actual piece, the fibers move in the wind. This being a digital commission, I will never see the work on Wising's walls, or I may never see the work on Wising's walls. I will only ever see a digital image. So I'm okay with the change, and the change is very exciting. And I'm going to end with a quote, which kind of pulled it all together with me and made me realize that, the fragmentation is fine, all part of the process. So I'm going to read this quote by Stuart Hall, the late Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall was a cultural theorist, and the quote says, "The subject, previously having a unified and stable identity, is becoming fragmented, composed not of a single, but of several, sometimes contradictory or unresolved identities." So, thank you, Wising. I look forward very much to seeing images of the work when it's installed. And so thank you for this opportunity. And that's the end of my presentation. Okay, so this image, basically, it's showing a mock-up of the Wising new block frontage with sections of my work installed. So it's a digital image, a digital representation. Sections of my work installed. So this work is split up into 5 panels, and it's fragmented because there's windows in between. So this is how it's intended to look on site. A rough idea of how it's intended to look on site. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Carol. That was brilliant. About all of your processes behind making that, and also just thank you for being so generous with the changes that we proposed to your work.
So
I know that was quite the process. So yeah, we're really, really appreciative, and can't wait to have it all up here at Wising. So should we move on to Bella's presentation, or does anybody need a quick break or anything like that?
Good.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
Okay, amazing. Cool. So we will now be hearing from Bella Milroy.
Oh, thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you, Carol, for a really wonderful presentation. Yeah, it was. It's so wonderful to be here and connect and experience your new work at Wising. It looks absolutely brilliant. I'm really looking forward to going and seeing it. And yeah, it's just wonderful to share some of our crossovers of our creative practices. So in my presentation, I'm going to be sharing just a handful of specific areas of my work, which are of particular relevance to today's conversation, where I'll be talking more about my studio practice and the creative process, my creative process overall, rather than individual works or commissions. So I'll begin by sharing that. So I work responsively through, as Ruth introduced me, through lots of different mediums as an interdisciplinary artist. And process is really fundamental to my practice. Everything is making, everything is a potential creative material. And touch and handheld is a really another kind of crucial component of this, both in the things that I find connection with or am connected to, but also in terms of scale. I have what I refer to as a satellite studio practice, which means that the majority of my making occurs within the space of my own arm span. So quite often that's my sofa or my bed or my wheelchair. Often it's on my phone. And it's something that is quite small. It's often quite cramped. It's shared, as you can see behind me, with different beings who I live with in this house. It's quite immediate, and it is often an experience of touch, or a way of how I can find ways of reaching out and touching things or ideas or feelings, either both in the immediate arm span or things that feel further away. I'll just give a short image description of what you can see on your screen, which is an image, a landscape image in colour, a photograph of what looks like a kind of scruffy area of grass, where there is like some kind of opaque material lent up against longer kind of vegetation and grass, and so the colours are more vivid in the foreground than behind that screen, where the grass is longer and greyer in colour. And so in apologies for any grumbles you heard there. So inspired by the ongoing project called 3030, which I've participated in since 2018, which was first created by 12O Collective and has recently moved to ArtQuest, I have a daily making practice where I strive to connect with some form of making every day, of which this image is one of them. This daily making acts as both a creative tethering to a studio practice that I'm often too unwell to access beyond a handful of minutes or a day, a week, a month, as well as further extending the concepts of touch and contact that I'm motivated to explore in my work. This kind of methodology is a conscious effort to render the creative moments we all experience every day and centre them in a space of active thinking about who I am in relation to that thing, this stuff, this person, this place. I think that's a kind of eternal questioning that I'm always kind of prompting and poking at my existence with. So I'll share a few images of that. So this is another image of my daily making practice. It's a landscape photograph of what looks like a tree with blossom on it. It's got quite nice round fullness to it, and it kind of almost looks like a cloud. And there's it is in colour, but it's quite tonal, in a kind of washed out bluey grey brown colour, and there's like layers to the image that makes it look quite glassy, like it's taken in a reflection of a window, possibly. I quite often draw my dogs and because when my studio exists on the sofa, that's where they exist as well most of the time. And so sometimes my making is just images of them, and this is a drawing of Doris through different shadows that were appearing, and the image is quite a expressive line drawing, which is difficult to make out what exactly it is that it looks like. It could be a dog, it could be a carnation flower, or it could be like a firework explosion. It's very loose, expressive drawing. Recently, I've been really inspired by my compost bin in terms of making mark making and potential for like collage. I really enjoy these kind of small interruptions with my surroundings, and the compost bin has really generated a lot of thinking like in that way, and it has lots of potential to be really exciting image making. I think they look like planets, and I'm really excited by the compost bin at the moment, and so that kind of pops up a lot in my daily making at the moment. And so this image is, it's a kind of aerial shot of a round black compost bin And in the centre is all of this different vegetation, and including bits of brown paper. And there's lots of different colours: greens, browns, yellows, oranges. And it looks like household waste mixed with garden waste as well. A really substantial part of my studio practice consists of gardening, and after receiving DYCP funds from Arts Council England last year, I've been able to reconnect with my allotment plot after years of shielding during the pandemic. And this is kind of what it looked like when I returned back to that space in around January 2022. And it's a space I now refer to as my studio allotments because that's what it is. And so, yeah, this is kind of what it looked like before. An image description would be that it's a kind of standard British allotment site. There's lots of allotment detritus around, like spades and buckets and compost bins. And there's like a big green mesh tunnel with some plants around it. It's like a wintry setting. There's no leaves on the trees. And yeah, it looks like your kind of standard allotment site. We had to do a lot of covering up and of the plots as a way of kind of trying to get back on top of it again. And there was lots. So essentially, most of last year was just the site covered in varying degrees of plastic sheeting, which was really exciting and inspiring in lots of ways, very sculptural. They looked a lot like, I imagined these different squares being kind of like almost like swimming pool covers. And again, getting to play with the kind of collage of the site is really exciting. There's always pallets around, there's always broken bricks, and getting to play with these kinds of materials on a larger scale is just so exciting when I'm moving from this kind of quite cramped setting of my domestic space where I'm making most of my time to then all of a sudden be outside in this larger space is very, very exciting creatively. And an image here is at that same allotment site on a wintry day, but one of the beds has been covered up in grey plastic sheeting, and weighing down that sheeting is lots of different heavy objects like wooden pallets, large wooden beams, and a few bricks. It looks quite strange. And here's a close-up of that plastic sheeting with these broken pieces of bricks and wood and like a kind of scrubby mud grass ground surrounding it. I had Polly Atkins' poem Unwalking very much in my head during this period because we weren't gardening in a kind of growing sense of the word. We were kind of ungardening, and it was all very much working on crip time, this very kind of slow long process, a practice of patience, which I'm constantly having to practice and re-practice all the time. I'll just go back actually. And this space is where I'm really challenging my fundamental experience of scale. As I say, that kind of breadth of my arms stretched out. The studio allotment is this mammoth endeavour to sculpt a space. It's bringing together these moving, living components of design and form and structure and multi-sensory, multi-creative experience all together all at once. It's there's a real kind of absurdity to it in many ways, especially in the nature of my disability, the nature of my limitations in living with chronic illness. And I kind of really enjoy working, being so ambitious in this kind of, and the demands of that is really exciting. I also play, the studio allotment's also where I play with my A0 flower press, mostly pressing large pieces of nettles and brambles and sticky weed. I'm really curious how these pieces can be transformed through a kind of choreography of placement upon the press, which is really exciting. And then the curing that turns them into these static pieces. It's just a process of editing that I'm really excited about, and creating this kind of bank of material that I'll then work on to inform my drawing practice and other areas of my work as well. So an image description for this is a landscape digital photograph in colour of what looks like a large kind of stack of paper, large pieces of paper, of which someone with pale skin is placing green, fresh plant material. And then this is an image of them being cured. So this is like taking the material out of the press, and it's these are kind of nettles, and so they're no longer that fresh, vibrant green, and they've kind of turned into this kind of sepia, flat pieces. I love playing with the kind of flatness of these sculptural components. It's a really exciting way of exploring three-dimensional materials. And so yeah, this is another shot of the large flower press with a lot of kind of grassy allotment material around it. It's a bright sunny day, and there's a shadow cast over the flower press. This is a close-up image of those brambles, again showing the kind of very flat pressed pieces that also are slightly lifted up from the paper and cast a really small shadow, and they are kind of in that sepia brown grey colour, and they look really beautiful. In December of last year, I planted the first roses of my rose garden design at the studio allotment, which consists of 26 roses in total. And the rose garden is coming on really nicely. And this month I sniffed my first flowers, which was amazing. And the design is will continue to evolve as my understanding of the rose deepens. It's the first time I've seen most of these plants in person, and there's so much more to them than seeing them in pictures. And so again, that kind of practice of patience is is continually present in this work. So here's some images of planting them out on a really cold, wet December day last year. And so this is a landscape photograph in colour of the same allotment site. Again, there's lots of plastic sheeting on different areas of the plot. It's a cold, wet day, and there's no leaves on the trees. And then there's some kind of like what look like twiggy little plants on two of these large soil beds. Here's an image of me whispering to one of these bare root roses to thrive and be beautiful, and it's a person crouched down on the floor with their hands around their face in a kind of whispering look, and they've got blue overalls on and a hat, and they look like they're talking to a little twig in the ground. There's this absurdity to this process that I really enjoy dancing around in. It's similar to why I love the concept of a daily making practice and the project of 3030, which I encourage anybody to go and check out if you don't already know it. I am existing in this body that's really quite compromised. It's tired all the time, it's sick, it's physically unable to be present in that space much of the time, and yet trying to make a garden. It feels both very small and ordinary, and then also completely cosmic and enormous. And I also would like to state that I do have help in putting this together, and it would not be possible without that support as well. There's this constant tension, this constant pushing back from the medium that I really love working with. It's part of what inspires me about this space, and here's an image of what it currently looks like now, although there's even more flowers since I took this photo a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, this is that same allotment site, but on a sunny spring summer day. And so there's a lot more greenery around. There's a row of red brick terrace houses in the background, and then the kind of further allotment sites in the distance. In the foreground, there are these two beds with small rose shrubs, some of which are in flower, and there's also a greenhouse and some other green vegetation as well. yeah, this space feels like this ultimate creative endeavor. I'm there kind of wishing, desiring, dreaming for this space to become what I imagine it will be. And the space all of the time and all of its living components are constantly kind of indifferent to that, which I just really love. I love that it's kind of, it's yeah, the indifference to my aspirations and desires for it, that constant pushback is just such an exciting thing to work with creatively. I'm continually humbled by it, awed by its capacity to push against my desires to shift and pull at it. In essence, it is both the challenge and the inspiration. And I love it. This is the same site kind of later on in the evening. The sun is lower in the sky and the roses are being backlit by the sun, and they look really bright and colourful, and the leaves themselves are being kind of shone through. And yeah, it's a really beautiful image, landscape photograph in colour. Here's a close-up of one of the roses that's being held by a hand with pale white skin, and the rose colour is this kind of deep pink that kind of curls out and fades to a lighter pink. If that could possibly do that rose justice to describe it as such, but that's a general idea of what that image looks like. And another close-up of a moss rose, which is a particular favourite of mine, that's of a flower that's just coming out of its bud, but the surrounding buds are kind of encrusted with this very fine spines of the moss rose, which is kind of part moss-like in its structure and then also kind of like thorny, kind of almost looks like the kind of ice crystals but in green, and the rose is just coming out and in this kind of deep pink swirl. I think I'd like to leave it there probably, and I'm looking forward to sharing more about gardening and creative work with you, Carol, on everything we've talked about so far.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Bella.